Growing up, I always felt like I was watching my family from the outside looking in. While my cousins spent their weekends shopping for designer handbags and posting Instagram stories from expensive brunches, I was buried in textbooks, working part-time jobs, and dreaming of a future where I wouldn't have to depend on anyone. They called me Boring Rebecca, the girl who chose studying over parties, who wore thrift store clothes while they flaunted their parents' credit cards. But I had a plan, and I was determined to see it through. Years of grinding through college, working multiple jobs, and building my consulting business from scratch had finally paid off. My digital marketing agency was thriving, pulling in more revenue in a month than most of my relatives made in a year. Not that they acknowledged my success. They either ignored it completely or made snide comments about how lucky I was. Lucky, as if the countless sleepless nights, the rejected proposals, and the constant hustle had nothing to do with it. If you're enjoying this story of family drama and standing up for yourself, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps me bring you more real-life stories that we can all relate to. And don't forget to share this with anyone who's ever felt undervalued by their own family. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens next. Tonight was supposed to be different. My Aunt Helen had been calling for weeks, practically begging me to attend what she called a family reunion dinner at Celestial, the most upscale restaurant in the city. "Rebecca, honey, it's been too long. We miss you so much," she'd cooed over the phone. Just one dinner, for family. The guilt tripping was masterful. She knew exactly how to make me feel terrible for keeping my distance from the people who'd spent years making me feel inferior. Against my better judgment, I'd agreed. Maybe I was curious to see if anything had changed. Maybe some part of me still hoped they'd finally see me as more than just the weird cousin who chose books over boys. Or maybe I was just tired of avoiding them and wanted to get it over with. Either way, I found myself standing outside Celestial at 7 p.m. sharp, smoothing down my black blazer and steeling myself for whatever awaited inside. The moment I walked through those glass doors, I knew I'd made a mistake. The entire extended family was already seated at an enormous circular table in the center of the restaurant's main dining room, a table clearly meant to make a statement. 20 people, maybe more, all dressed to impress and laughing loudly enough to draw stares from other diners. My cousin Victoria spotted me first, her perfectly contoured face breaking into what I'd learned to recognize as her fake sweet smile. "Oh my God, Rebecca," she squealed, standing up and air-kissing both my cheeks. "Look, everyone, our little entrepreneur finally decided to grace us with her presence." The way she said entrepreneur made it sound like a cute hobby, rather than a legitimate business. Several heads turned in my direction, and I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same one I'd carried through every family gathering of my childhood. My Aunt Helen appeared at my side, her jewelry jangling as she wrapped me in an overpowering hug. "Darling, you look wonderful." "Success suits you," she said, though her eyes were already scanning the table, calculating where to seat me. I followed her gaze and realized with growing dread that the only empty chairs were either at the very end of the table, practically in a different time zone from everyone else, or squished between my teenage cousins, who were already deep in animated conversations about TikTok trends I'd never heard of. I moved toward one of the end chairs, but Victoria's perfectly manicured hand shot out to stop me. "Oh, sorry, Becca," she said with that same saccharine smile. "That seat's taken. Sarah's just in the bathroom." I looked around the table again, noting how conveniently every single chair seemed to have an invisible reservation. The message was clear. I was welcome, but only on their terms, in whatever leftover space they deemed appropriate for me. "What about there?" I asked, pointing to a chair that was clearly empty, with no purse, jacket, or any other sign of occupation. Victoria's boyfriend, a trust fund baby named Chad, whose biggest accomplishment was inheriting his grandfather's real estate portfolio, laughed loudly. "That's mine, actually. I'm just sitting here temporarily." He gestured vaguely to another chair. "Musical chairs, you know?" The lies were so transparent it was almost insulting. They weren't even trying to be subtle about it. I stood there for a moment, feeling the eyes of the entire table on me, waiting to see how I'd react. This was their test. Would I accept their scraps gracefully, or would I cause a scene? The old Rebecca would have quietly taken whatever seat they offered and spent the evening feeling small and insignificant. But I wasn't the old Rebecca anymore. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying just enough edge to cut through their laughter, "I think I'll make my own arrangements." I walked over to an empty table nearby, a small two-seater that gave me a perfect view of their group, and calmly moved one of the chairs to the edge of their circle. Not quite part of their table, but close enough to technically be included. The silence that followed was delicious. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, but I caught the flash of annoyance in her eyes. Chad looked confused, like he wasn't quite sure what had just happened. My Aunt Helen tried to smooth things over with nervous laughter. "Oh, Rebecca, don't be silly. Come sit with the family properly," she said, but there was an underlying tension in her voice now. She hadn't expected me to call their bluff so directly. "I'm perfectly comfortable here, thanks," I replied, settling into my chair and opening the menu with deliberate calm. "I have a great view of everyone from here." A waiter appeared almost instantly. The service at Celestial was famously efficient, and I ordered a glass of their best Pinot Noir, something that would have cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. The dinner proceeded exactly as I'd expected. Course after course of the most expensive items on the menu, bottle after bottle of premium wine, and desserts that cost more than some people's monthly car payments. My family members ordered with the casual indifference of people who never worried about money, or rather, people who never worried about spending other people's money. Every few minutes, someone would shoot me a meaningful glance, as if to say, "You're seeing all this, right? You understand what's expected of you?" Victoria ordered the Wagyu beef with gold flakes. Chad insisted on the chef's tasting menu with wine pairings. My Aunt Helen couldn't decide between two desserts, so she ordered both. They were putting on a show, demonstrating just how much money they could spend in a single evening, building up to the moment when they'd expect me to cover their extravagance with a smile. I sipped my wine and watched it all unfold with growing amusement. They had no idea what was coming. As the evening progressed, I found myself fascinated by the elaborate performance my family was putting on. It was like watching a play where everyone knew their role, except for the final act. Victoria kept shooting me these sideways glances while dramatically exclaiming over every dish. "Oh my God, this truffle risotto is absolutely divine. It's probably the most expensive thing I've ever tasted." She said this while looking directly at me, as if I was supposed to be impressed by her capacity for luxury consumption. Chad, meanwhile, had appointed himself as the evening sommelier, ordering bottle after bottle of wine with increasingly pretentious commentary. "This vintage has notes of blackcurrant and leather," he announced, swirling his glass like he was conducting an orchestra. "It pairs perfectly with the grass-fed beef." Each bottle cost more than what I used to make in a week during my college years, but he ordered them with the casual air of someone who'd never seen a price tag that made him pause. My younger cousins, Emma and Sophie, both in their early 20s, were documenting everything for their social media accounts. Every dish had to be photographed from multiple angles. Every glass of wine needed the perfect lighting for their Instagram stories. "This is so aesthetic," Emma kept saying, a phrase that seemed to encompass everything from the restaurant's decor to the color coordination of their desserts. From my strategically positioned chair, I had the perfect vantage point to observe not just my family's behavior, but also the reactions of other diners. An elderly couple at the table next to us kept glancing over with barely concealed disapproval at the volume of my family's conversations. A business dinner across the room had clearly been disrupted by Chad's increasingly loud wine commentary. The staff, while maintaining their professional composure, were clearly working harder to manage my table than any other in the restaurant. My Aunt Helen, ever the orchestrator, kept trying to draw me into conversations while simultaneously showcasing everyone else's supposed achievements. "Victoria just got promoted to senior marketing coordinator," she announced, as if this was equivalent to discovering the cure for cancer. "And Chad's opening his second restaurant next month." The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria's promotion was at her father's company, where she'd been given a fancy title to justify her salary. Chad's second restaurant was actually just him buying into a franchise with family money. Meanwhile, I built my business from absolutely nothing, competed against established agencies, and was now pulling in more monthly revenue than their combined annual salaries. But somehow, Their accomplishments were worth celebrating while mine were barely acknowledged. "That's wonderful," I said, raising my wine glass in a mock toast. "Here's to family success." The words carried just enough edge that Victoria's smile tightened slightly, though she maintained her composure. As the main courses arrived, the spending escalated even further. My Uncle Richard, Victoria's father and the self-appointed patriarch of our extended family, decided this was the perfect moment to order champagne for the table. Not just any champagne, but a bottle of Dom Perignon that cost more than most people's rent. "We're celebrating tonight," he declared, though what exactly we were celebrating remained mysteriously undefined. The champagne appeared with great fanfare, complete with the ceremonial popping of the cork and theatrical pouring into crystal flutes. Each glass represented about $50 of premium champagne, distributed to people who were already well past their alcohol limits for the evening. I noticed several family members barely touched their flutes, too focused on continuing their wine consumption to appreciate the expensive bubbly. "Rebecca, you simply must try the lobster thermidor," my cousin Marcus called out from across the table. He was Victoria's younger brother, blessed with the same sense of entitlement, but lacking her social intelligence. "It's absolutely incredible. I mean, for $300 it better be, right?" He laughed at his own joke, completely oblivious to how his casual mention of the price was meant to impress me. $300 for one dish. That single entree cost more than I used to spend on groceries for an entire month during my struggling years. And Marcus was treating it like pocket change, like money that materialized out of thin air, rather than from someone's hard work and sacrifice. The casual arrogance was breathtaking. My Aunt Helen leaned over toward me, lowering her voice to what she probably thought was a conspiratorial whisper. "The kids are having such a wonderful time," she said, gesturing toward the table where Emma was still photographing her dessert from various angles. "It's been so long since we've all been together like this. Family is everything, don't you think?" There it was, the guilt trip wrapped in sentiment. The implication that if I truly valued family, I'd be happy to fund these extravagant displays of consumption. The suggestion that my money was somehow communal property, available for their entertainment whenever they deemed it appropriate to call a family gathering. "Family is definitely important," I agreed, deliberately keeping my tone neutral. "It's interesting to see everyone's priorities." The comment was ambiguous enough that she couldn't call me out on it, but pointed enough that I saw her expression flicker with uncertainty. The dessert course pushed the evening into truly absurd territory. Victoria ordered 3 different desserts, claiming she couldn't choose between them. Chad insisted on the dessert wine pairings to accompany his chocolate soufflé. Emma and Sophie shared a dessert that arrived with actual sparklers, creating another photo opportunity for their social media documentation. Even the teenagers at the table were consuming desserts that cost more than most adults spent on an entire dinner. As I watched this elaborate display of financial excess, I found myself calculating the running total in my head. Appetizers, multiple courses, premium wines, champagne, desserts, tax, and gratuity. We were looking at a bill that would easily exceed $4,000. $4,000 for one dinner, ordered by people who'd made it clear I wasn't really welcome at their table, but was expected to pay for their evening anyway. The most remarkable part was how normal they all acted about it. There was no acknowledgement of the extraordinary expense they were racking up, no moment of hesitation or consideration for the person they expected to foot the bill. They'd simply assumed that my success meant I was obligated to fund their lifestyle, that my hard-earned money was theirs to spend as they saw fit. Victoria caught me watching the dessert parade and raised her champagne flute in my direction. "This is so perfect, Rebecca. Just like old times, except now we can actually afford to do it right." The implication was clear. We could afford it because I would be paying for it. The presumption was staggering. As the evening wound down and the empty plates began to pile up, I could see the anticipation building around the table. Conversations became more animated, laughter grew louder, and there was an almost electric energy in the air. They were all waiting for the same thing. The moment when the check would arrive and their plan would come to fruition. I sat back in my chair, sipped the last of my wine, and prepared for the show to begin. They had no idea what was coming, but I'd been planning my response to this exact scenario for years. All those nights when I'd laid awake, feeling humiliated by their treatment, all those family gatherings I'd avoided to protect myself from their condescension, it had all led to this moment. The waiter appeared with that familiar black leather folder, the one that contained the evening's reckoning. He placed it directly in front of me with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd clearly been instructed on who was expected to pay. The entire table fell silent, 20 pairs of eyes suddenly focused on my reaction. I could feel their expectation hanging in the air like a dense fog. This was it, the moment they'd been building toward all evening. The moment when I would dutifully reach for my credit card and transform their elaborate performance into my expensive reality. The moment when I would once again play the role they'd assigned to me, the successful family member whose money was available for their entertainment. But as I reached for the check, I couldn't help but smile. They thought they knew how the story would end, but they were about to discover just how wrong they could be. I picked up the black leather folder with deliberate slowness, letting the anticipation build around the table. 20 faces watched me with varying degrees of expectation, smugness, and barely concealed greed. The silence was so complete I could hear the soft jazz playing in the restaurant's background, the distant murmur of other diners who were enjoying normal family meals that didn't involve elaborate financial manipulation. Opening the folder, I let my eyes scan the itemized bill with the same careful attention I gave to my business contracts. Every appetizer, every bottle of wine, every unnecessarily expensive entree was listed in neat rows of black ink. The subtotal was $3.847. With tax and the automatic gratuity for parties over 8, the final total came to $4,592.73. Nearly $4,600 for one dinner that I'd been excluded from until it came time to pay. Victoria was practically vibrating with nervous energy across from me. She kept shooting glances at Chad, who was leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted that things would go his way. My Aunt Helen wore her most encouraging smile, the one she'd perfected during years of asking family members for favors. Emma and Sophie had finally put down their phones, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "So," Victoria said with forced cheerfulness, "that wasn't too bad, right? I mean, for a celebration dinner with the whole family?" Her laugh sounded brittle in the quiet air. "You've got this, don't you, Rebecca? It's really nothing for someone as successful as you." There it was, the casual dismissal of nearly $5,000 as nothing, simply because they assumed it wasn't their money being spent. The complete disconnect between the value of money and the effort required to earn it, the breathtaking entitlement that allowed them to spend freely while expecting someone else to bear the consequences. I closed the folder and set it back down on the table, but instead of reaching for my wallet, I leaned back in my chair and smiled. It wasn't a warm family gathering smile. It was the smile I wore during business negotiations when I held all the cards and was about to use them. "You know what's interesting?" I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent table. "I've been sitting here all evening, watching you all order whatever you wanted, drink whatever caught your fancy, and celebrate whatever it is we're supposed to be celebrating. And not once, not a single time, did anyone ask if I was okay with covering this bill." The temperature in our little corner of the restaurant seemed to drop several degrees. Victoria's forced smile began to waver. Chad's confident posture shifted slightly as he sat up straighter. My Uncle Richard cleared his throat, preparing to launch into what was undoubtedly going to be a speech about family obligations and how successful people should share their good fortune. But I wasn't finished. Not once did anyone say, "Rebecca, would you mind picking up dinner tonight?" Or, "Rebecca, we're planning to order extensively. Are you comfortable with that?" Instead, you seated me away from the family table, made it clear I wasn't really wanted here until it came time to pay, and then just assumed I'd cover whatever damage you decided to rack up. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. I could see my family members exchanging glances, trying to figure out where this was heading and who should respond first. They'd expected gratitude, or at least resignation. They hadn't prepared for confrontation. My Aunt Helen recovered first, slipping into her well-practiced role as the family peacemaker. "Oh, Rebecca, sweetie, we didn't mean it like that. We just thought, well, you're doing so well, and we're all so proud of you. We wanted to celebrate your success." This whole dinner was really about honoring what you've accomplished. The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that I almost admired her skill. She was reframing their greed as generosity, their exploitation as celebration. It was masterful manipulation, the kind that had worked on me countless times during my childhood and young adult years. Honoring my success, I repeated slowly, as if tasting the words, by excluding me from the family table and then expecting me to pay for your party. That's an interesting way to show honor. Chad decided this was his moment to step in, probably thinking his charm and casual authority would smooth things over. Come on, Rebecca, don't make this weird. It's just dinner. We're all family here, and family helps each other out. You've got the money, we had a great time together. Everybody wins. Everybody wins, I echoed. Except that I didn't have a great time, Chad. I spent the evening being reminded that you don't actually want me here, you just want my money. There's a difference between family helping each other and family using each other. Victoria's composure was starting to crack. Her voice took on a slightly sharper edge as she said, Look, Rebecca, we get that you're upset about the seating thing, but that was just a misunderstanding. Don't let a little confusion ruin the whole evening. We're trying to include you here. Include me? I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Victoria, you literally told me to find a spot outside when I tried to sit at the family table. Your exact words were, Rebecca, this table is for family, go find a spot outside. So no, you weren't trying to include me. You were trying to use me. The reminder of her earlier words hit the table like a physical blow. I saw several family members wince, probably remembering their own participation in that moment. Victoria's face flushed red, but whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. Marcus, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, tried to inject some levity into the situation. Okay, maybe we got off to a rough start tonight, but we're here now, we've had good food and good wine, and we're all together. That's what matters, right? Let's just pay the bill and call it a successful family reunion. Let's just pay the bill, I repeated. That's interesting phrasing, Marcus. Because when you say, let's, you mean Rebecca should, don't you? Just like when Victoria said, we can afford to do it right, she meant, Rebecca can afford to do it right. You've all gotten very comfortable using plural pronouns when you're talking about my money. The waiter, who had been hovering nearby with the obvious anxiety of someone watching a situation deteriorate in real time, approached our table cautiously. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said with professional politeness, but we do need to settle the account this evening. Perfect timing. I looked up at him with a smile that was genuinely warm. He was just doing his job after all. Of course, I said. The account definitely needs to be settled. I picked up the bill folder again and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Then I placed it directly in front of Victoria. There you go, I said pleasantly. I'm sure you'll figure out how to handle it. The shock was immediate and complete. Victoria stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake that had suddenly appeared on the table. Chad's mouth actually fell open. My Aunt Helen made a small gasping sound. The rest of the table sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. Rebecca, my Uncle Richard said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he'd used to control family discussions for decades. Stop playing games. Pay the bill so we can all go home. I stood up slowly, gathering my purse and jacket with deliberate calm. I'm not playing games, Uncle Richard. I'm done playing games. For years, you've all treated me like I exist solely to fund your entertainment. Tonight, you made it crystal clear that I'm not actually welcome in this family unless I'm paying for the privilege. So congratulations. You're finally getting what you actually want. You get to have your family dinner without me. You can't be serious, Victoria said, her voice rising with panic. Rebecca, you can't just leave us with this bill. We can't afford this. I paused in putting on my jacket, genuinely curious about her statement. You can't afford it? But you ordered it. Victoria, you literally ordered 3 desserts because you couldn't choose between them. Chad ordered bottles of wine that cost more than some people's car payments. You all spent the evening talking about how successful and accomplished you are. Surely successful, accomplished people can afford to pay for their own meals. The logic was unassailable, and they knew it. They'd spent the entire evening demonstrating their supposed prosperity, ordering without regard for cost, and celebrating their achievements. The only problem was that their prosperity was entirely dependent on other people's money, and their achievements were largely fictional. "This is ridiculous," Chad said, standing up as well. "You're being petty and vindictive. We're family, Rebecca. Family doesn't abandon each other over money." I turned to face him fully, and something in my expression made him take a small step back. "You're absolutely right, Chad. Family doesn't abandon each other over money. Family also doesn't exclude each other from the dinner table and then expect them to pay for everyone else's meal. Family doesn't treat each other like ATMs with legs. So I guess the question is, when exactly did you stop treating me like family?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. No one had an answer for it because we all knew the truth. They'd never really treated me like family at all. I'd been the weird cousin, the outsider, the one who was tolerated rather than welcomed. The only difference now was that I had money, which made me useful to them in a way I'd never been before. "I'll be in the bar area," I announced to the table at large. "Take your time figuring out how you want to handle this. I'm not going anywhere just yet." And with that, I walked away from the table, leaving them to face the consequences of their choices for the first time in their entitled lives. The bar area at Celestial was a study in understated elegance, dark mahogany panels, soft leather seating, and dim lighting that created intimate pockets of conversation throughout the space. I settled into a corner booth where I could observe the main dining room while remaining comfortably out of earshot. The bartender, a professional woman in her 30s who radiated competent calm, approached with a knowing smile. "Rough evening?" she asked, with the kind of intuitive understanding that suggested she'd witnessed more than her share of family drama from her position behind the bar. "You could say that," I replied, ordering a top-shelf whiskey neat. "Just watching some people learn about consequences for the first time in their lives. From my vantage point, I could see the chaos unfolding at what had been our family table. The neat circular arrangement had devolved into a huddle of panicked conversations. Victoria was gesturing wildly while Chad leaned over her shoulder, both of them staring at the bill as if it might spontaneously change its total through sheer force of will. My Aunt Helen had her phone out, probably calculating how much cash she had access to, while my Uncle Richard appeared to be having an increasingly heated conversation with Emma and Sophie about their spending habits. The waiter, the same professional who'd been serving us all evening, stood at a respectful distance, but I could see the tension in his posture. He'd clearly dealt with situations like this before, but that didn't make them any less awkward. Other diners were beginning to notice the commotion, their own conversations quieting as they tried to figure out what was happening at the large table that had been dominating the restaurant's attention all evening. My whiskey arrived, and I took a slow sip while watching the drama unfold. There was something deeply satisfying about observing their panic from a position of complete calm. For years, they'd put me in uncomfortable situations, made me feel small and unwelcome, and then expected me to smile and go along with whatever they wanted. Now the shoe was on the other foot, and they had no idea how to handle it. Marcus appeared to be having some kind of breakdown. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely, and he kept running his hands through his hair while staring at his phone screen. I suspected he was checking his bank account balance and finding it woefully inadequate to cover his portion of the evening's expenses. The $300 lobster thermidor probably seemed a lot less appealing when it was coming out of his own pocket. About 10 minutes into my drink, Victoria appeared at my booth. Her perfect makeup was slightly smudged now, and there was a desperate edge to her smile that she was trying hard to mask. She slid into the seat across from me without being invited, her movements sharp and agitated. "Rebecca," she began, her voice pitched in that artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here. We're not trying to take advantage of you. We genuinely want you to be part of the family." I took another sip of my whiskey and regarded her with mild curiosity. "That's interesting, Victoria. Because about an hour ago you told me this table was for family and I should find a spot outside. Now suddenly I'm part of the family again. What changed?" She flushed red, but pressed on. "Look, maybe I said that wrong. I was stressed about the seating arrangements, and it came out harsher than I meant it. But you know I didn't mean anything by it. We're cousins, Rebecca. We grew up together. We did grow up together. I agreed. And do you remember how you treated me when we were kids? The birthday parties you didn't invite me to? The family vacations I somehow never heard about until after they happened? The way you and your friends would laugh about my thrift store clothes and my part-time jobs? Victoria's composure cracked slightly. We were kids, Rebecca. Kids say stupid things. That was years ago. You're right, it was years ago. But here's the thing, Victoria. Nothing's really changed, has it? You still see me as someone who's useful when you need something but otherwise not worth including. The only difference is that now I have money, so you're willing to pretend we're close. She leaned forward, desperation creeping into her voice. That's not true. We invited you tonight because we wanted to reconnect. We miss having you around. You invited me tonight because you wanted someone to pay for your party. I corrected. And the proof is sitting right there at that table, in the form of a $5,000 bill that you assumed I'd cover without question. Victoria glanced back toward the dining room, where the situation appeared to be deteriorating further. Chad was now on his phone, probably calling his parents to ask for emergency funds. My Aunt Helen was engaged in what looked like an increasingly frantic conversation with the waiter. Several other family members had their heads together, clearly trying to pool their resources. Look, Victoria said, turning back to me with a new strategy. Maybe we did assume you'd help with the bill, but that's because you're successful, Rebecca. You've done so well for yourself, and we're proud of you. When family members succeed, they help out the rest of the family. That's how it works. Is it? I asked. Because I don't remember you helping me out when I was struggling to pay for college. I don't remember any family assistance when I was working 3 jobs to keep my business afloat during its first year. Funny how this family helps family philosophy only works in one direction. She had no answer for that because we both knew it was true. When I'd needed help, I'd been on my own. Now that I was successful, suddenly family loyalty was paramount, and sharing was expected. The hypocrisy was breathtaking in its shamelessness. Rebecca, please, she said, dropping the pretense of casual conversation. We can't afford this bill. Some of us are already maxed out on our credit cards. If you don't help us, we're going to be in serious trouble. Then maybe you shouldn't have ordered 3 desserts, I replied calmly. Maybe Chad shouldn't have insisted on wine pairings with every course. Maybe you should have thought about your financial limitations before you started ordering like money was no object. Victoria stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. The concept of considering costs before spending was apparently so foreign to her that she couldn't process it. These were people who'd lived their entire lives, assuming that someone else would handle the consequences of their choices. You're really going to do this, she said, her voice flat with disbelief. You're really going to let your own family struggle with this bill while you sit here drinking expensive whiskey. I'm going to let my family face the natural consequences of their decisions, I corrected. You made choices tonight, Victoria. You chose to exclude me from your table. You chose to order extravagantly. You chose to assume I'd pay for it all. Those were your choices, and now you get to live with them. She sat there for a moment, processing the reality of the situation. I could see her cycling through different emotional strategies. Anger, guilt-tripping, bargaining, trying to find something that would work on me. But I'd spent years building up immunity to her manipulation tactics. Finally, she played what she probably thought was her trump card. What would your mother think about this, Rebecca? She raised you to be better than this. She taught you about family loyalty and taking care of each other. The mention of my mother, who had passed away 3 years earlier, was a low blow, and Victoria knew it. She was trying to weaponize my grief and my mother's memory to get what she wanted. It was perhaps the most disgusting tactic she'd employed yet. My mother taught me to be kind and generous, I said, my voice taking on a harder edge. She also taught me not to let people walk all over me. And she definitely taught me the difference between helping family and enabling their bad behavior. Don't you dare use her memory to justify your greed. Victoria flinched as if I'd slapped her. She'd miscalculated badly, assuming that emotional manipulation would work where logical arguments had failed. Instead, she'd only reinforced my resolve and revealed just how far she was willing to go to avoid taking responsibility for her actions. "This isn't over," she said, standing up from the booth with as much dignity as she could muster. "We're going to figure this out, and then you're going to regret treating your family this way." I watched her walk back to the table, her posture rigid with frustrated anger. She was met by a chorus of anxious questions from the rest of the family, all of whom had clearly been watching our conversation and hoping she'd return with good news. The disappointment on their faces when they realized she'd failed was almost comical. I finished my whiskey and signaled the bartender for another. The evening was far from over, and I suspected the entertainment was just getting started. My family was about to learn some expensive lessons about consequences, accountability, and the difference between family love and financial exploitation. From my comfortable booth, I had a front row seat to watch it all unfold. From my position in the bar, I watched as my family's panic reached a crescendo. The elegant dining room had become their personal crisis center, with hushed phone calls, frantic text messages, and increasingly desperate conversations happening simultaneously. The other diners were no longer pretending not to stare. The spectacle had become too obvious to ignore. My Uncle Richard appeared to be attempting damage control, his voice carrying across the restaurant despite his efforts to keep it low. I caught fragments of his conversation with the waiter. "Family emergency. Credit card issues. Just need a few minutes." The professional smiled politely, but I could see the skepticism in his posture. He'd clearly encountered this situation before. Chad had stepped away from the table entirely, pacing near the restaurant's entrance, while conducting what appeared to be an increasingly heated phone conversation. From his gestures and facial expressions, I guessed he was talking to his parents, probably trying to convince them to wire him emergency funds to cover his portion of the bill. The fact that a grown man in his 30s was calling mommy and daddy for money wasn't lost on me. Emma and Sophie, the social media queens, had finally put away their phones, probably because they'd realized that documenting their family's financial humiliation wasn't going to get them the kind of engagement they were hoping for. They sat in stunned silence, occasionally whispering to each other while shooting panicked glances in my direction. The bartender refilled my whiskey without being asked, and I caught her suppressing a smile. "I take it this isn't your first time witnessing family drama?" I asked. "Honey, I've been working in upscale restaurants for 15 years, she replied quietly. "I've seen every variation of family dysfunction you can imagine. But I have to say, watching someone finally stand up to the entitled relatives is always satisfying. Is it that obvious what's happening?" She nodded toward the dining room. "When a table orders like that and then suddenly can't pay the bill, there's usually someone being taken advantage of. The fact that you're sitting here calmly while they're all panicking tells me you were the intended victim who decided not to play along." Her assessment was remarkably accurate. I'd become the evening's entertainment not just for my family, but for the entire restaurant staff who'd watched this drama unfold from the beginning. About 20 minutes into my second drink, my Aunt Helen made her approach. Unlike Victoria's aggressive desperation, Helen moved with the calculated grace of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of manipulation. She slid into the booth across from me with a warm smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rebecca, sweetheart," she began, her voice dripping with maternal concern. "I think we need to have a heart-to-heart conversation about what's really happening here." I leaned back in my seat, curious to see what angle she'd take. Helen was more sophisticated than Victoria, more subtle in her approach. She wouldn't make the mistake of being too obvious about what she wanted. "I've been watching you tonight," she continued, "and I can see that you're hurt. We've made you feel excluded, and I take full responsibility for that. As the eldest family member here, I should have made sure you felt welcome from the moment you walked in." It was a good opening, acknowledging wrongdoing without admitting to the full scope of their behavior, accepting responsibility in a way that sounded noble while actually deflecting blame from the others. "That's very diplomatic of you, Aunt Helen," I replied. "But we both know this isn't about hurt feelings." Her smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course it's about hurt feelings, dear. Family relationships are built on emotions, on feeling valued and included. When those feelings are damaged, it affects everything else, including financial expectations. She paused, recognizing that I wasn't going to let her dance around the real issue. Rebecca, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending money isn't part of this conversation. But you have to understand, when someone in the family achieves the kind of success you have, there are certain expectations that come with that success. Expectations, I repeated, such as paying for expensive dinners I was barely invited to? Such as helping family when they needed. She corrected smoothly. Your grandfather built his business so that future generations of our family would be taken care of. Your parents worked hard so that you could have opportunities they never had. Success in this family has always been about lifting everyone up, not just yourself. It was masterfully done, reframing their greed as family tradition, their exploitation as continuation of generational values. She was trying to make me feel guilty for not perpetuating what she presented as a noble family legacy. My grandfather's business failed when I was 12, I pointed out. My parents worked hard, but they never had the kind of money you're talking about, and the success I've achieved came from my own work, not from family wealth being passed down. Helen's smile became more strained. Details aside, the principle remains the same. Family takes care of family. When one person has more, they share with those who have less. It's basic human decency. Is it? I asked. Because I don't remember anyone sharing with me when I had less. I don't remember family help when I was struggling to build my business. This sharing philosophy seems to be very selective in its application. She leaned forward, abandoning the gentle approach for something more direct. Rebecca, you're being childish. Yes, maybe we could have done better at supporting you in the past, but you're successful now, and with success comes responsibility. You can afford to help us, and we need your help. That's what family does. What family does, I mused. Let me ask you something, Aunt Helen. If I wasn't successful, if I was still struggling financially, would I have been invited to this dinner tonight? The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly trying to formulate an answer that wouldn't reveal the obvious truth. Of course you would have been invited, she said finally, but there was no conviction in her voice. Your family. Am I? Because Victoria told me quite clearly that the table was for family, and I should find a spot outside. That doesn't sound like family treatment to me. Helen waved her hand dismissively. Victoria was stressed about the seating arrangements. She didn't mean anything by it. She meant exactly what she said. I corrected. And so did you when you orchestrated this entire evening. You invited me here with one purpose: to pay for everyone else's good time. You seated me away from the group to make it clear I wasn't really part of the celebration, but close enough that I couldn't miss the show you were putting on. Helen's facade was cracking now, her maternal warmth replaced by barely contained frustration. You're being paranoid, Rebecca. We wanted to celebrate with you, to include you in family activities. The fact that you're successful enough to help with expenses is just a happy coincidence. A happy coincidence that resulted in a $5,000 bill? It's not $5,000, she said quickly, then caught herself. I mean, it's expensive, yes, but it's not unreasonable for a celebration dinner with this many people. It's not unreasonable if the people ordering the food are the ones paying for it. I agreed. But it becomes unreasonable when you expect someone else to cover the cost without even asking their permission first. Helen was silent for a moment, clearly realizing that her subtle approach wasn't working any better than Victoria's direct assault. When she spoke again, her voice carried a harder edge. Fine, let's be completely honest with each other. Yes, we hoped you would cover the dinner. Yes, we ordered more than we normally would, because we thought you could afford it. But that doesn't change the fact that we're family, Rebecca. These people love you, even if they don't always show it perfectly. They love my money, I corrected. There's a difference. That's not fair, and you know it. Is it not? Then why don't I ever hear from any of you, unless you need something? Why wasn't I invited to Emma's graduation party last year, or Sophie's engagement celebration? Why do I only get calls when someone needs a loan or wants me to invest in their latest business venture? Each question hit like a physical blow. Helen's composure was completely gone now, replaced by the kind of angry desperation that comes when carefully laid plans start falling apart. You're being cruel, Rebecca. You're punishing people who care about you because of your own insecurities and resentments. This isn't about money. This is about you wanting to hurt us because you feel like we didn't appreciate you enough in the past. You're right about one thing, I said, standing up from the booth. This isn't just about money. It's about respect, consideration, and basic human decency. 3 things you've never shown me, and 3 things I'm done pretending I don't deserve. Helen stood as well, her voice rising with panic. Rebecca, please, don't do this to us. We can't handle this bill on our own. Then you shouldn't have created it, I replied simply. I walked past her toward the restaurant's entrance, leaving her standing alone in the bar area. As I passed the dining room, I could see the chaos had reached fever pitch. Chad was still on his phone, now gesticulating wildly at whoever was on the other end. Marcus appeared to be having some kind of panic attack. The waiter was standing at a respectful distance, but I could see the manager approaching the table with the kind of serious expression that suggested the restaurant's patience was wearing thin. I paused at the entrance, turning back to take one last look at the scene. 20 people who'd spent the evening treating me like a walking ATM were now facing the reality of their choices. It was a beautiful sight. But I wasn't quite done yet. There was one more lesson I wanted to teach them before the evening ended. I stepped back into the restaurant, but instead of heading toward the chaos at my family's table, I approached the maître d' station. The elegant woman behind the podium looked up with professional concern. She'd clearly been monitoring the situation developing in her dining room. Excuse me, I said quietly. I'm Rebecca Chen. I was dining with a large party at table 12. Her expression immediately became more attentive. Yes, Miss Chen. Is there anything we can help you with this evening? Actually, there is. I pulled out my business card and handed it to her. I'm a regular patron here. I've brought several business clients for dinner over the past 2 years. I wanted to make sure that the situation at table 12 doesn't reflect poorly on your establishment or create problems for your staff. She glanced at the card, and I saw recognition flash in her eyes. My agency had indeed brought considerable business to Celestial, and restaurants like this kept detailed records of their high-value customers. We appreciate your consideration, Miss Chen. These situations can be challenging for everyone involved. I imagine they can be, which is why I'd like to make a proposal. I kept my voice low, ensuring our conversation remained private. I'm going to settle my portion of the bill, specifically what I ordered for myself this evening. As for the rest of the party, well, they're adults who made their own choices about what to order. The maitre d' nodded slowly, understanding the implications immediately. However, I continued, I don't want your staff to suffer because of this situation. Would it be possible to add a 25% gratuity for the serving team to my personal bill? They've worked incredibly hard tonight under difficult circumstances. Her professional composure cracked slightly, replaced by genuine gratitude. That's extraordinarily generous of you, Miss Chen. Good service deserves recognition, I replied. Could you please have my waiter bring me just my portion of the bill? I'll settle it immediately. Within minutes, the waiter appeared with a small leather folder containing my individual charges, 1 glass of wine with dinner, my modest entree, and now the additional gratuity I'd requested. The total came to $127, a stark contrast to the nearly $5,000 disaster my family was still struggling to resolve. As I signed the receipt, I became aware of a presence behind me. I turned to find Victoria approaching, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and fury. Rebecca, what are you doing? She hissed, trying to keep her voice down but failing. You can't just pay for yourself and leave us hanging. I'm doing exactly what you suggested earlier, I replied calmly. I'm finding my own spot. You made it clear I wasn't really part of the family dinner, so I'm treating this exactly as you intended, as separate meals that happen to occur in the same restaurant. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Is it not? Because your exact words were, Rebecca, this table is for family, go find a spot outside. I found my spot, I enjoyed my meal, and now I'm paying for what I consumed, just like any independent adult would do. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. You're being vindictive. You're punishing us for one stupid comment. I'm not punishing anyone, I said, turning to face her fully. I'm simply treating you exactly the way you've treated me. You wanted me excluded from the family experience until it was time to pay the bill. So I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. I'm excluded, and you get to handle your own bill. The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter around us. Other diners were no longer pretending not to watch. The drama had become too compelling to ignore. I could see phones being discreetly pointed in our direction, probably capturing what was about to become someone's viral TikTok story about entitled family members getting their comeuppance. You can't do this to us, Victoria said, her voice rising to a level that was definitely disturbing other patrons. We're family. Family, I repeated thoughtfully. You know, Victoria, I've been thinking about that word a lot tonight. Family is supposed to support each other, include each other, treat each other with respect and consideration. Tell me, when exactly did you last treat me like family? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. We both knew the answer. When did you last invite me to a family gathering that didn't involve asking me for money? When did you last call just to see how I was doing? When did you last show any interest in my life that wasn't related to what I could do for you? The silence stretched between us, filled with years of accumulated resentment and truth. That's what I thought, I said quietly. You want to use the word family, like it's a magic spell that obligates me to fund your lifestyle. But real family doesn't work that way, Victoria. Real family doesn't exclude people from the table and then expect them to pay for everyone else's dinner. I could see our entire extended family watching from their table, some still frantically working their phones, others simply staring in shock at this unprecedented revolt against their established order. Chad had ended his phone call and was walking toward us with the aggressive swagger of someone who thought intimidation might succeed where manipulation had failed. Rebecca, he said, his voice carrying an edge of threat. You're making a big mistake here. Family doesn't forget this kind of betrayal. I turned to look at him with genuine amusement. Betrayal? That's an interesting choice of words, Chad, because I would have described tonight as me finally refusing to be betrayed by people who've been using me for years. We're not using you, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Aren't you? Then explain to me why I only hear from any of you when you need something. Explain why I was seated away from the family table tonight. Explain why you all ordered the most expensive items on the menu without asking if I was comfortable covering the cost. Chad's face flushed red, but whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. You're successful, Rebecca. Successful people help their families. Successful people choose who they help and under what circumstances, I corrected. They don't get manipulated into paying for other people's indulgences. This is insane, Victoria interjected. You're going to destroy our family over money. I'm not destroying anything, I replied. I'm simply refusing to be the family ATM anymore. If that destroys your version of what our family relationship should be, then maybe it wasn't much of a relationship to begin with. The manager of Celestial appeared at that moment, drawn by the increasingly loud conversation and the obvious distress of the large party that was still unable to settle their substantial bill. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, impeccably dressed and radiating the kind of calm authority that comes from years of managing high-end establishments. I apologize for interrupting, he said with polished professionalism, but we do need to resolve the situation at table 12. Perhaps we could discuss this more privately? Victoria turned to him with desperate hope. Yes, absolutely. We just need a few more minutes to sort out a payment issue. Of course, the manager replied smoothly. We're happy to work with you. We accept cash, credit cards, or we can split the bill among multiple cards, if that would be helpful. The suggestion sent a visible wave of panic through Victoria. Splitting the bill would mean each person paying for their own extravagant orders, something none of them had prepared for when they'd been ordering with such abandon earlier in the evening. Actually, I interjected, there seems to be some confusion about the payment arrangement. I'll be settling my own portions separately. I held up my receipt, already taken care of. The manager glanced at the receipt, then back at the chaotic scene at table 12. His years of experience had clearly taught him to read between the lines of family drama. I see, so the remaining balance would be for the rest of the party. That's correct, I confirmed. They're all adults who ordered their own meals. I'm sure they'll figure out how to handle the payment among themselves. Chad stepped forward, his face now red with barely contained rage. This is ridiculous, Rebecca. You know damn well we can't cover that bill without your help. Then, perhaps you should have thought about that before ordering, I replied calmly. Or better yet, perhaps you should have included me in the discussion when you were planning this expensive evening. The manager cleared his throat diplomatically. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to intrude on family matters, but we do need to settle the account this evening. Would you prefer to handle this at the table, or would you like to step into my office? Victoria looked between me, the manager, and the table full of increasingly panicked relatives. Her perfect composure had completely cracked, replaced by raw desperation. Rebecca, please, I'm begging you, don't do this to us. I'm not doing anything to you, I said, keeping my voice level despite the growing scene. You created this situation entirely on your own. Every single person at that table made conscious choices about what to order, knowing full well they were racking up an enormous bill. The only mistake I made was assuming I was invited here as family rather than as a piggy bank. My Uncle Richard had finally abandoned his phone calls and was approaching our group, his face thunderous with the kind of patriarchal authority he'd used to control family situations for decades. Rebecca, enough of this childish tantrum. Pay the bill so we can all go home and discuss this privately like adults. Childish tantrum? I turned to face him directly. Uncle Richard, what's childish is ordering expensive food and wine without any plan for how to pay for it. What's childish is assuming someone else will cover your indulgences without bothering to ask their permission first. Your family, he said, as if that settled everything. Family helps family. Family includes family, I shot back. Family doesn't tell someone the table is for family only and then expect them to pay for everyone else's meal. The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter around us, other diners openly staring at the drama unfolding in what was supposed to be an elegant dining establishment. I could see some people discreetly recording with their phones, probably capturing what was about to become social media content about entitled family members learning hard lessons. Marcus appeared at his father's side, his earlier panic now transformed into angry defiance. Fine, Rebecca. You want to be petty? You want to humiliate us in public? Go ahead. But don't expect us to forget this. Don't expect to be welcome at family gatherings anymore. I almost laughed at the irony. Marcus, I haven't been welcome at family gatherings for years. The only difference is that now you're being honest about it, instead of pretending I'm included while treating me like an outsider. You're choosing money over family, my Aunt Helen said, appearing beside her husband with tears streaming down her face, though whether they were genuine or performed for effect I couldn't tell. Your mother would be so disappointed in you. The mention of my deceased mother was the second time tonight someone had tried to weaponize her memory, and I felt my calm composure slip slightly. My mother would be proud of me for finally standing up for myself, I said, my voice taking on a harder edge. She taught me to be generous and kind, but she also taught me not to let people take advantage of me. She would be disappointed in all of you for treating your own family member this way. The manager, who had been observing this family meltdown with professional patience, finally stepped in more decisively. I'm going to suggest we move this conversation to a more private setting. The current situation is disturbing other guests, and we need to resolve the payment issue. There's nothing to resolve, I said firmly. I've paid for my meal. The rest of the party needs to figure out how to handle their own bill. Chad took a step closer to me, his posture aggressive enough that the manager immediately moved to intercede. You think you're so much better than us now, don't you? Just because you have some money, you think you can treat your family like garbage. I think I deserve basic respect and consideration, I replied without backing down. Something I've never received from any of you, unless you wanted something from me. Victoria made one last desperate play. Rebecca, if you do this, we're done. All of us. You'll never be part of this family again. I looked around at the faces surrounding me. People who'd spent years making me feel small, excluded, and unwanted, but who now expected me to fund their lifestyle without question. The threat of being cut off from this toxic dynamic wasn't the punishment Victoria thought it was. You know what, Victoria? I said, pulling out my phone. That sounds perfect. I opened my banking app and showed her the screen. I'm donating $5,000 to the local food bank tonight. That's more than your entire bill. The difference is that money will go to people who actually need help, rather than people who just want to live beyond their means at someone else's expense. The donation went through with a few taps, and I showed them the confirmation screen. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. I clearly had the money to cover their bill, but I was choosing to spend it on people who deserved help, rather than on relatives who felt entitled to it. There, I said, putting my phone away. I've spent more money in the last 5 minutes than your entire bill would have cost me. The difference is that I chose how to spend it, rather than having it assumed and expected. The silence that followed was deafening. My family stood there processing the reality that I truly wasn't going to bail them out, that their years of casual exploitation had finally reached their natural conclusion. The manager cleared his throat one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, I really do need to insist that we resolve the payment situation immediately. We have other guests waiting for tables, and this matter needs to be settled tonight. I turned to him with a polite smile. Of course. As I mentioned, I've already settled my portion. The rest of the party will need to work out their own payment arrangements. I looked back at my stunned relatives one final time. Good luck with that. And with that, I walked out of Celestial, leaving them to face the consequences of their choices for the first time in their entitled lives. 3 months later, I was sitting in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on the door. Rebecca, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your cousin Emma? I looked up from my computer, surprised. After the disaster at Celestial, I hadn't heard from any of my family members. There had been a few angry voicemails in the days immediately following the incident, mostly from my Uncle Richard threatening legal action that we both knew he couldn't pursue, and from Victoria alternating between fury and attempts at guilt-tripping. But eventually the calls had stopped, and I'd assumed I'd gotten exactly what Victoria had promised, to be cut off from the family completely. Send her in, I said, curious despite myself. Emma entered hesitantly, looking nothing like the confident social media influencer who'd been documenting every course at dinner 3 months ago. She seemed smaller somehow, more uncertain, and there was a maturity in her expression that hadn't been there before. Hi, Rebecca, she said quietly, taking the seat across from my desk when I gestured to it. I wasn't sure you'd see me. I'll admit I'm surprised you wanted to see me, I replied. How did things work out that night, by the way? Emma's cheeks flushed pink. It was really bad. We ended up having to call pretty much everyone we knew to pool together enough money. Chad's parents had to wire him emergency funds. Victoria had to max out 3 different credit cards. Some of the younger cousins had to ask their parents for loans. It took hours to sort out. She paused, staring at her hands. The restaurant was really patient with us, but it was humiliating and expensive. Between the interest on the credit cards and the loans people had to take out, that dinner ended up costing everyone way more than the original bill. I nodded but didn't comment. The natural consequences of their choices had played out exactly as expected. The thing is, Emma continued, afterward, when we were all dealing with the financial mess and trying to figure out what happened, I started really thinking about everything you said that night. And I realized you were right. About all of it. Her voice was quiet but steady. We did treat you terribly, Rebecca. Not just that night, but for years. We excluded you from family events, ignored your success, and then expected you to pay for our fun like it was your obligation. It was selfish and awful, and I'm ashamed I was part of it. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda, but Emma seemed genuinely remorseful. Still, I'd learned to be cautious when it came to family members bearing apologies. What's changed? I asked directly. Emma took a deep breath. That night was a wake-up call for me. Not just about how we treated you, but about my whole life. I was 23 years old and had never paid for my own dinner at a nice restaurant. I had credit cards I'd never looked at the statements for because Dad always handled them. I was living this completely artificial life funded by other people's work. She looked up at me with something I'd never seen from her before, genuine self-awareness. After that dinner, Dad cut off my credit cards. Said if I was old enough to help rack up a $4,000 restaurant bill, I was old enough to handle my own finances. It was terrifying at first, but also liberating, I guess. I got a real job, started budgeting, learned what things actually cost. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm living authentically. That's a significant change, I acknowledged. What kind of work are you doing? Social media management, actually. Turns out all those years of posting content actually taught me some useful skills. I'm working with small businesses to develop their online presence. The pay isn't huge, but it's honest work that I'm good at, and I'm building something that's mine. I found myself genuinely impressed, despite my wariness. That sounds like meaningful work. It is. And Rebecca, I wanted to come here not just to apologize, but to thank you. Thank me? Emma nodded earnestly. If you had paid that bill like we expected, I would have learned nothing. I would have continued living this fake, entitled life, where other people's money funded my experiences. You forced all of us to confront the reality of our choices, and that was the best thing that could have happened to me. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I wanted to give you this. I opened it to find a check for $127, the exact amount I'd paid for my portion of the dinner that night. Emma, you don't need to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. You paid for your own meal that night while the rest of us expected you to cover everything. This is me paying you back for the lesson in accountability. It's not much, but it's money I earned myself, and I want you to have it. I looked at the check, then at my cousin's earnest face. The amount was small, but the gesture was enormous. For the first time in our family relationship, someone was acknowledging that my money had value, that it came from my work and effort, and that taking it without permission had been wrong. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. This means more than you know. Emma smiled, and for the first time it looked completely genuine. Can I ask you something? Are you happier now, after cutting us all off? I considered the question carefully. I'm more peaceful. I don't dread family gatherings anymore because I'm not invited to them. I don't get calls that make me anxious because I know someone wants money. I've been able to focus on relationships that are actually reciprocal and supportive. Do you miss us at all? I miss the idea of having a close extended family, I said honestly, but I don't miss the stress and manipulation that came with the reality of our relationships. Emma nodded thoughtfully. That's fair. We didn't give you much to miss, did we? We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke again. Would it be okay if I stayed in touch? Not asking for anything, not trying to rebuild the whole family dynamic, just person to person. I'd like to get to know my cousin as an actual human being instead of as a source of funding. I looked at her carefully, weighing the risks and possibilities. The old Emma had been thoughtless and entitled, but the person sitting across from me seemed genuinely changed. People could grow and learn from their mistakes, and everyone deserved a chance at redemption if they were willing to do the work. I'd be open to that, I said finally, but with clear boundaries. No family drama, no requests for money or business favors, no attempts to mediate between me and other family members. Absolutely, Emma agreed quickly. Just us, getting to know each other as adults. After she left, I sat at my desk thinking about the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. For 3 months, I'd assumed that cutting off my toxic family members meant losing all connection to that part of my life forever. But Emma's visit suggested that maybe, occasionally, people could surprise you. Maybe sometimes the consequences you imposed on others could lead to genuine growth rather than just resentment. That evening, I found myself thinking about the night at Celestial with a different perspective. I'd gone into that dinner expecting to be used and had prepared to stand up for myself. What I hadn't expected was that my refusal to enable their behavior might actually help someone change for the better. I endorsed Emma's check and deposited it into my business account. The money itself was insignificant, but what it represented was priceless. Acknowledgement, accountability, and the possibility that sometimes tough love could lead to genuine transformation. As I closed my laptop for the day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to family relationships. Cautious optimism. Maybe cutting toxic people out of your life didn't always have to be permanent. Maybe If they were willing to do the real work of change, there could be second chances. But those chances would have to be earned, not assumed. And they would have to come with respect, not entitlement. For the first time in my adult life, I was looking forward to seeing where a family relationship might lead.